The shooting range. In this episode, Pages of History, different approaches to tank building in Britain and Germany, and what came out of them. Tips and tricks, a simple HE round, and it's not so simple to use. And metal beasts, the owner of the famous pike nose. But before we begin, here's to all the women watching this episode and happy International Women's Day. We welcome you in War Thunder. We see you in the comments under our videos, as well as on our servers. May all of you encounter worthy opponents, reliable teammates, and loyal friends, both in the game and in life. And I say, hear, hear, Gaijin. We continue talking about the more famous and classic War Thunder machines. Today's guest is the Soviet IS-3 heavy tank with a battle rating of 7.3, one of the brightest examples of Soviet post-war armored tech. Its armor can withstand many hits, and the powerful cannon can cause complete mayhem in the enemy's combat compartment with just one shot. The tank is armed with a 122mm gun with elevation angles from -3 to +20 degrees. Additionally, the machine is equipped with a couple of machine guns, the anti-aircraft D-SK and the DT, which is paired with the main weapon. Plus, there are large smoke canisters in the rear. In the frontal projection, the hull is protected by 110mm of armor plates, which converge in the center, forming the so-called pike nose. The sides are covered by 90mm of angled plates, which themselves are also covered with protective screens. The armor around the gun mantlet is 250mm thick, and on the turret sides, it starts at 172mm at the base and gradually decreases going up to the roof. The tank's weak spots are the area next to the driver's hatch, the turret ring, and a small area in the gun mantlet. The crew is placed in a classical manner. The driver is in front, the rest are in the turret. The transmission and the engine are located in the rear of the hull, and as for the ammo, it's wherever there seems to be enough free space inside the combat compartment. On the battlefield, the IS-3 acts as a classic heavy tank. Powerful APC-BC rounds with almost 200 grams of TNT equivalent explosives provide for a fair amount of one-shot, one-kill situations. The armor can withstand a hit from almost any World War II cannon, and the mobility is enough to constantly remain at the spear end of your team's offensive actions. Small elevation angles make you think twice before driving this tank into hilly areas. And the same goes for most of the other machines created in the Soviet tradition. But because of its power, the IS-3 has to fight against post-war tech as well, including late experimental tanks and early MBTs. Here, those APC-BC rounds already aren't that effective. They cannot pierce more than 230mm of armor at point-blank range and at 90 degrees. At the same time, the tank's armor, designed to survive against conventional enemy armor-piercing shells, isn't that reliable against heat projectiles, ATGMs, and early APF-SDS rounds. Therefore, the tactics for each battle are highly dependent on the lineup of the enemy team. You can act aggressively against Tier 4 machines, boldly advancing on your preferred directions and tanking retaliation fire with your armor, especially at medium distances. Still, better avoid getting involved in prolonged skirmishes against several opponents at once. First of all, because your reload rate and turret rotation speed are quite slow. But your Tier 5 opponents represent a much more serious threat. Sure, the IS-3 can occasionally survive an enemy heat round, and the turret can even sometimes reflect early APF-SDS projectiles, but you still have to be way more careful. In battle, it's better to stay close to the medium tanks and MBTs, join forces to fight for capture points, and destroy enemies one at a time. And one more thing, there's no need for angling on the IS-3. That pike nose armor layout provides the best protection exactly when you're facing the enemy with your front side, instead of doing that at an angle. Today, the military of different countries agree that the MBTs are the best tanks. Agile, well-protected universal machines with powerful weapons, capable of effectively solving the widest range of combat missions. Their advantages are so obvious that it's difficult to imagine in this day and age the logic of someone who would prefer other designs. But it wasn't always like that. For a long time, there was no agreement between tank designers, so different tank building traditions were each going their own way. The contrast between them is most noticeable when you look at the approaches preferred by German and British designers. We are used to the fact that medium tanks are usually better armored but less speedy than light tanks. But the Germans didn't think so. All early German tanks had similar armor and mobility. For example, when the designers improved the frontal armor of their creations up to 50 millimeters thickness, they did it simultaneously on the medium Panzer IV and the light Panzer 38T. Then, they acted the same when it came to weapons. All tank guns had both armor-piercing and high-explosive fragmentation ammo to fight both armored vehicles and infantry. The Germans created a whole line of universal tanks. Sure, they didn't set any records in terms of outstanding protection or mobility, but they also had no critical flaws either. The British, however, went the opposite way and put their faith in specialized machines. Their tanks were divided into two classes. Infantry tanks, as the name implies, were intended to support foot soldiers. These machines had thick armor and low speed. Indeed, soldiers aren't moving that fast anyway, so why rush? And if there was a need for mobility, then there was the other class of machines, the so-called cruiser tanks. Speedy and with mediocre armor, they were designed to flank the enemy and unexpectedly attack them from behind. You don't need a lot of armor if you don't have to storm pre-prepared fortifications, but on the contrary, mobility is very handy in these cases. Tank weapons were also specialized. Some guns, such as the 2-pounder or the 6-pounder, fired only armor-piercing solid rounds. They could hit enemy tanks but were almost useless against other targets. And yes, in theory, there were other types of rounds issued for these guns, but in reality, tankers didn't have them at their disposal. Conversely, there were other guns like the 76mm howitzer that only fired HE fragmentation and smoke rounds, but had no AP ammunition. For some time, these traditions existed in parallel, but the outbreak of World War II quickly and severely demonstrated the pros and cons of the ideas of both British and German designers. We're in North Africa and the British are about to attack the Italians. The light crusaders won't stand 10 seconds against enemy weapons, so sending them into battle seems quite dangerous. Conversely, the Matilda's armor is almost invulnerable to the same weapons, so the choice seems obvious. Montage: the infantry tanks successfully break through defenses, the Italian troops flee, and it would be amazing to consolidate the success and drive the enemy further away. But the slow-moving Matildas are completely incapable of chasing the retreating forces or making swift raids on the enemy's rear. The Crusaders would come in handy here, but they were left far behind. It turned out that one or the other part of the tanks was constantly idle, and when German tank units arrived in Africa, everything turned upside down. The Matilda's armor couldn't withstand their fire, and the slow machines became excellent targets. The separation of weapons also turned out to have a price. There is a known case where a Matilda was stubbornly firing at a lone German machine and couldn't damage it. Solid shots were piercing through the shield and flying past the gunner, and he himself continued destroying the British as if nothing had ever happened. One HE round would be enough. But where would a Matilda get it? By the way, in the game, we've fixed the supply problem for the British military, so the HE rounds for the Matilda are always available, if you want them. The British approach didn't pass the reality check. They had to change things, especially so because not only the Germans followed the path of universal machines, some countries of the anti-Hitler coalition pursued the same ideals. Take, for example, the United States. Their Shermans proved to be amazing in battle. They were reliable, balanced in terms of speed and armor, and also equipped with both AP and HE rounds at the same time. As a result, British designers finally decided to step away from making strictly specialized tech and added some armor to their cruiser tanks to match the level of protection of their American colleagues. And then they went even further, becoming the first nation in the world to create a machine that later became known as the main battle tank. We know it as the Centurion, but that's a completely different story for another time. High-explosive rounds are very simple in design and very difficult to use. This isn't a type of ammo that you always need. At the lower ranks, AP shells that are with and without explosive fillers do the job quite effectively, while the top tiers are ruled by the AP-FSDS and heat rounds. Nevertheless, there are some cases where HE projectiles are better than any of the others. That is, of course, if they're in competent hands. That's what we'll be talking about today. Let's start with the powerful HE rounds of the Soviet MBTs. Combined with the high fire rate of their guns, they are surprisingly effective even against well-armored opponents. It would seem that most enemies have nothing to fear here, as they are reliably protected, not only in the frontal projection but also on the sides. But if you aim at the base of the turret, the blast wave will hit directly into the roof of the hull. That's demonstrated on the example of the German Leopard. We shoot at it directly under the turret, and voila! The explosion easily breaks the roof and causes ammo detonation. Depending on the type of enemy tank, various external structural elements can serve the same purpose. Periscopes, commander cupolas, etc. You just need to be sure that the detonator actually reacts to something located directly above the enemy's roof. With the Abrams, for example, that something might be its gunner's protruding scope. One well-placed shot, and we hit the gun breech and the crew in the turret at the same time. But this approach isn't universal for all machines. If your gun has a slow reload rate, or it isn't heavy enough in terms of caliber, using HE rounds isn't worth the risk. Loading an AP-1 and simply breaching any of the enemy's vulnerable zones will be a lot more efficient than carefully aiming at the enemy's turret ring or commander's cupola. Heavy caliber howitzers have their own peculiarities. When you are playing on the Sturmpanzer II or a similar tank destroyer, it's sometimes enough to shoot an HE round at the enemy's bottom. Most opponents will either be sent to the hangar right away, or at least will have insane critical damage. You'll just need to calmly finish them off. Even covers don't always provide enough protection against such machines, especially if the opponent is driving something with an open cabin. In that case, you don't even have to shoot directly at the target. Just hit a house wall or another obstacle nearby. The blast wave and the hail of fragments will surely make a couple of enemy crew members a lot sadder. But of course, HE rounds prove themselves the best on tank destroyers with low BR, like the Japanese Horo. Their main opponents are pre-war light and medium tanks that aren't exactly known for being very well protected. It's also useful to consider that the curvature of HE rounds' trajectories is usually much higher than that of AP projectiles. Therefore, long-distance accuracy is far from perfect, especially if you don't use your rangefinder. On the other hand, one can also benefit from such ballistic trajectory. For instance, you can fire from cover and still remain relatively safe. At the same time, you can improve your accuracy with binoculars. On such machines, a commander's viewpoint is usually located higher than that of the gunner, which also plays into your hands. Still, for training purposes, try playing in AB first. Here, you'll have automatic deflection, which will simplify firing HE rounds. Plus, you'll have time to train your eye before entering modes that have no markers. And now we'll move to answering your questions that you, as always, ask in the comments. The first message was sent by a player called Yeetboy. When will you expand past BR 10.3? When will there be vertical decompression of the tech trees for jets? As you well know, we can't really answer the when questions before there are any official statements made. But, of course, with all the new updates and new tech coming our way, we'll be sometimes rethinking the matchmaking and battle ratings. It's quite possible that at some point there will be BRs higher than 10.3. Preposterous Altercation asks, "Wow, more experiments in games? That was fun." Challenges in real gameplay are very hard, a lot harder than you might think. First of all, we have to do them while recording a 4K video at the highest possible graphic setting. Also, we have to do them twice in a row, because this show exists in 2 languages, which means recording them in 2 different interfaces, for the English-speaking audience and the Russian-speaking one. We won't promise to make them every episode, as they are incredibly difficult to do, but we will be doing them once in a while. Then there is a question sent by Bullet Salad 392. The George Burling story was great. I'd like to hear more stories about World War II aces and tank legends. Thanks. We're very impressed by his incredible life as well. We'll keep your request in mind, and in future, we'll tell you about many other outstanding personalities that influenced the history of World War II. Another question comes from Homeless Studio. How do you model the tanks in your game? I'm learning to model tanks with high accuracy, but blueprints aren't accurate at all. That's true. This is why we don't just have modelers in our team, but also historians and military consultants. They study various documents and join forces to figure out all the details, so that the final model is as authentic as possible. There's a lot of work behind each model that you see in the game. And the last message for today was written by Winged Wolf. I can't wait for the next major update. I saw the Swedish jet in the end. Between us, the next update is basically just around the corner. Keep your eyes peeled. Once again, that's it for today. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment. Come on, subscribe to the channel like you do each week. Leave a like, because you do. And click the bell so that you don't miss the next videos. And of course, please do tell us your thoughts in the comments below. We'll be seeing you in just a week.